Thanks so much for tuning in to our 2026-27 FAFSA demo. My name is Kaitlyn Goslinga, Senior Assistant Director of Financial Aid at University of the Pacific, responsible for financial wellness and all of our outreach. If you or your family is interested, we do also have this demo filmed in Spanish, which we will have linked below. Let's get started. So the FAFSA itself is at the studentaid.gov website. So you're gonna head there first. Once you are at studentaid.gov, you can see the FAFSA form tab right up at the top. You will click there, and then you're gonna click on the link that says complete the FAFSA form. For today's demo, I am using a prototype site. It has a very, very similar look and feel to the actual FAFSA itself. So you will have the option then to start a new form, and then from there, it will likely prompt you to log in. So every person who joins a FAFSA or contributes to part of it is going to need their own login. This is known as your FSA ID or password. You can create an account if you have not done so already here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and log in as our student Raya, who is doing the FAFSA as a brand new first-time student. So you can see here, after she's logged in, she'll have the option to start a new form. You can also head here to edit any existing forms, or if you are a contributor and you are accepting an invitation to join a FAFSA, you can do so here as well. All right, and then it is going to prompt you to indicate who you are as you are starting the FAFSA. So are you completing the form as the student, or are you a parent? So from the parent role, you also have the option to start the FAFSA. I would say our advice here is to start the FAFSA as the student. It's the most streamlined and straightforward way to start the form. And after all, it's the student's FAFSA. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna start the form as a student here. There are gonna be a number of FAQs, some quick videos to help you understand the FAFSA a bit better. So feel free to take a look at these. We're not gonna look at them today, but I do wanna highlight what you might need to get ready to fill out the form. So the 26-27 FAFSA is going to be looking at 2024 tax data. So we're gonna wanna have those documents on hand if possible. And also if any of these other things apply to you, records of child support received, current balances of cash, savings, and checking accounts, or net worth of investments, businesses, and farms. So it might be helpful to gather some of that ahead of time. This next section is going to talk about who contributors are with the FAFSA process. So a contributor is anyone who is joining the form and providing their information. So this could be a spouse if a student is married, or students' parents or step-parents, depending on their family situation. All right, completing the FAFSA should only take around 30 minutes or even less. And every single individual who provides their information will need to provide consent and approval for any relevant tax information to be transferred automatically from the IRS. Last but not least, after you submit your FAFSA, it will be processed in just a handful of business days, and then from there, you'll be able to receive an official update that the form has been processed. You should get an email. You will also get a notification of your student aid index. That is a number that financial aid administrators utilize to determine your financial aid eligibility. From there, once a school has your official FAFSA, and once you've been admitted, that's also key, they will then be able to work on issuing financial aid offers. All right, let's jump right in. We're gonna start the FAFSA form. Since Raya is logged in, all of this information is populated already. Take a look at it, make sure it's accurate. If you do need to change anything, you'll wanna do so through your account settings, which are linked right here. All right, next we are gonna indicate the student's state of a residence. This is typically where the student lives when they're not attending school. So Raya here is in New York, and she has been a resident of New York since she was born. So if you were born in the state you live in, you will use your birth month and year. Otherwise, you can indicate the date, the approximate date that you moved to that state. All right, so this next section, as we talked earlier about providing consent and approval, this next section is the approval for an individual's tax information to get transferred directly from the IRS onto the FAFSA. This should save families so much time, especially if this goes through successfully, which it does for most individuals. So please make sure to take a look, read through all of this information. There's some FAQs here at the bottom, and then you'll hit approve. If any individual hits decline, that does mean that that student will not be eligible for any financial aid. So this process is really important, even if you didn't work or file taxes, because what will happen is the IRS will ultimately say, hey, we don't have a record on file for this individual, and that matches if you didn't work or file taxes for the 2024 calendar year. You'll get a notice here if your information is securely and successfully imported, and if so, you'll get that success message. If for some reason the IRS is not able to transfer your data in, that is okay. That's where you're gonna wanna have those tax forms on hand, because the form is then gonna prompt you to type in those numbers by hand. So it might take you a little bit longer, but you'll still be able to provide that information for the FAFSA. All right, this next section is going to talk about the student's personal circumstances to determine who they need to move forward with inviting on their FAFSA form. All right, so this section talks about the student current marital status. So please keep in mind, we are on the student section, right? Sometimes we can get a little bit confused, think it might be asking about parents, but this is the student's marital status. All right, so what are the student's college or career plans for the 26-27 school year? Will they be a first year, a sophomore, junior, and beyond, or working on a master's or a doctoral program? If you're a brand new student heading to college for the first time, you'll mark first year freshman. And of course, as you are moving through the financial aid process from one year to the next, these questions will likely be updated as you move on. And when the student starts the 26-27 school year, will they already have their first bachelor's degree? Yes or no? So if you have not graduated from college with a bachelor's degree, you're gonna mark no, and you'll move on from here. Okay, so there are a number of personal circumstances here that will help to determine if a student is considered independent for financial aid purposes. What that means is an independent student does not need to include parent information on the FAFSA. Typically, students that are under the age of 24, unless they meet one of these other exemptions, do need to include their parent information on the form. So we've got a couple of options here if the student is serving on active duty with the armed forces, if they're a military veteran, if the student has a child of their own or other people who live with them and receive more than half of their financial support, or anytime since the student turned 13, they were an orphan, they were a ward of the court, they were in foster care, or are they or were they a legally emancipated minor, or were they in legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step-parent. All of these situations here would have court paperwork involved, right? They would have to be determined by a court in their state of residence. I know sometimes students get tripped up on this legal guardianship question, but this would be if a court determined someone other than your parent or step-parent was your legal guardian. But if none of these apply, you would check that box and move on from here. All right, this question is referring to student homelessness. So on or after July 1st of 2025, was the student unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Yes or no? This next section is going to discuss student unusual circumstances. So these are a number of examples in which would normally prevent a student perhaps from contacting their parent, or if contacting their parent might pose a risk to the student. So you can see here, a student may be in this scenario if they are in an abusive or threatening environment, if they've been abandoned or estranged from their parents, if they have refugee status, have experienced human trafficking, perhaps parents are incarcerated and contact with the parents would be a risk, or a student may be unable to locate their parents. So if you are in one of these situations, you would mark yes here. And then what will happen is you'll likely want to follow up with the financial aid offices that you are sending your FAFSA to discuss this a little bit further, because they may need to talk through some of your options a little bit more with you. These are not all of the examples, but these are some of the more common ones. But if this does not apply to you, you'd hit no here and move on. All right, so based on how we answered those questions, Raya is determined to be a dependent student. This means that parent information does need to be listed on the FAFSA. This next question is asking if the student's parents are refusing to provide their information on the form. Maybe they are supportive, but not willing to file the FAFSA. That could be the case. If so, the student would mark yes, and they would only be eligible for a direct unsubsidized loan. But again, not a super common scenario. This is already marked no here. The parents are not refusing, so they will move forward with the next section. All right, a couple more questions about demographics, background, student's family. So these demographic questions are not provided to any of the colleges that you are sending your FAFSA to. They are simply for federal data keeping purposes. They will not impact your financial aid eligibility, and they're not used in any aid calculations. So this question asks, what is the student's sex? The next section here is going to ask about the student's race and ethnicity. So the student is able to perhaps check one of those boxes there, for example, and you can see with some of these there are further drop downs, a little more descriptive. You can also mark prefer not to answer. All right, so we are going to answer the question about student citizenship status. To be eligible to file a FAFSA, a student does have to be a U.S. citizen or national, or an eligible non-citizen. If the student is an eligible non-citizen, they will go ahead and provide their A number in this box here. All right, this next question asks about the education status of the student's parents. This can be utilized at times for state grant and scholarship purposes. So did neither parent attend college? One or both attended, but neither finished. One or both completed college, or if you don't know, you can indicate that there as well. This question asked if the student's parent or guardian was killed in the line of duty, either while serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces on or after the events of 9/11, or in official duties as a public safety officer. Yes or no? All right, high school completion status. So when the student starts college for 26-27, will they have their high school diploma, a state recognized high school equivalent like a GED? Were they homeschooled, or none of the above? All right, and here is where you need to indicate what high school you graduated from. So I've got some pre-populated options here. So you can go ahead and search for your high school by state, by city, and then the high school will pop up there. And you want to make sure you add it and then hit continue. All right, verify that is correct. And then we'll move on. All right, so this next section is going to ask about student finances. But you can see here there's this question, what if you have special financial circumstances? So the FAFSA is going to require 2024 tax information from either students and or parents, spouses. At times, things can change from one year to the next. Maybe a parent has experienced a job loss or a job change, something to where their income on the FAFSA is not reflective of their current financial situation. We still have to include the 2024 tax information on the form. There's no getting around to that. However, you're certainly welcome to follow up with the financial aid office of the school that you are either attending or plan on attending to let them know that you've had a change in circumstances, and they will walk you through the next steps for any potential consideration. All right, we are going to hit continue. Some of these questions here are going to look very similar to the parent section, so we'll talk through them here, but keep in mind we still are on the student section of the form. So many of these things may not apply to the student if they didn't work or file taxes in 2024. If any question does not apply to you as you are completing the FAFSA, please make sure to put a 0 in the box. So was there an IRA rollover, meaning funds transferred from one IRA plan to another? Was there a pension rollover into another type of plan? So kind of moving retirement funds from one plan to the next. This next question here, amount of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS. I'm going to take a minute to explain this because this question is very often answered incorrectly by students. Very typically, most students need to answer this question with a 0 because most scholarships and grants, like a federal Pell Grant, are not considered as taxable income. So you simply do not want to just list how many grants or scholarships you received in the prior year. You would only do so if you were required to claim them as taxable income and file a tax return for them. Again, really rare, not common for many students. All right, foreign earned income exclusion. If you had that as part of your taxes, you can find that on your federal 1040 form, Schedule 1. All right, this next section is going to ask about student assets. So currently, how much the student has in cash, savings, and checking accounts. Current net worth of investments, including real estate. Please do not include the value of the home that you live in. That is not what is being asked for here. Real estate would be if you had other properties, maybe a rental, vacation home, something along those lines. And you would put the net worth there. That's the value minus any debts owed against them. Investments can also include things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, things like that, but not a protected retirement account. We don't ever need the value of those either. So 401k, 403b, we do not need those reported on the FAFSA. And then lastly, current net worth of businesses and investment farms. So if the student has a business, again, we're taking the net worth. So that is the value minus any debts owed. Do not include, though, a family business that has 100 or fewer full-time employees, a farm where the family resides, or any commercial fishing businesses. All right, next section, colleges and career schools. So here is where we are going to indicate where we want to send the FAFSA form. You have two options here. You can search by state or you can enter a school code. So for example, if you wanted to send your FAFSA to University of the Pacific, you would type in our school code here, 001329. You're gonna hit the search box and we will pop right up. Otherwise, if you don't have the school code of the schools that you are looking at, no worries. If you know where they are, the city and the state, you can find that school. Obviously for our demo here, we've got a lot of different options that have popped up. Here is where you can select multiple colleges at one time, especially if you are applying to multiple schools in one state. You can actually add up to 20 schools on an individual FAFSA. So go ahead, add all those schools, and then hit continue. Keep in mind here, for some states to be considered for state financial aid, you need to make sure you have a school from that state listed. So for example, in New York, you have to have an eligible in-state New York school listed. So keep that in mind depending on where you live and where you are applying. All right, so next we are gonna move forward with inviting a parent as a contributor. Like we saw, Raya is a dependent student who needs to include parent information. But sometimes it can be a little bit confusing who you may need to invite, especially in the case of maybe a divorce or a separation of the legal parents. If you are not certain, we're gonna click on this link here and I'm gonna show you a really helpful tool that you can use. This will help you to determine which parent needs to be listed on the form. So to start here, you would enter the first name of the student's parents, and we will do so here just to give you an example. So these were Raya's legal parents, Alcina and John, and it asks, are they married to each other, yes or no? And for this example, we'll say no. Perhaps they separated earlier on. Do they live together, yes or no? I'm gonna put no. And then it asks which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months. So you'll need to take a look at those two individuals and your own situation to determine, again, which parent provided more financial support. If each of them supports the student equally, you need to list the parent who has the greater income and assets compared to the other parent. So we'll say Alcina here, and then it's gonna ask, did Alcina remarry? Or is Alcina currently married, right? A step parent? We're gonna say yes. So here, it's gonna list Alcina is the parent on the FAFSA form, but Alcina's spouse's information is needed as well. Now, one thing to note, the student only needs to invite Alcina to the form. Alcina will then provide information on her current marital status, and if they filed taxes jointly, only Alcina's information will be needed. If they filed separately or didn't file together in that tax year, Alcina and spouse will need to provide their consent and approval to have their tax information shared on the FAFSA. So again, this is a super handy tool, especially if you're not quite sure which parent you may need to invite. So over here, we're gonna move on and we are going to invite Alcina. Again, the student only needs to invite one parent here. And then they will click send invite. If you've done the FAFSA before, you're gonna notice that this section looks a little bit different. Students don't need their parent's social security number, date of birth, or their address in order to invite them to the FAFSA anymore. All they need is their email address. We're gonna hit send invite. And you can see that invite was sent via email to Alcina. Otherwise, Raya can copy and send this invite link directly to their parent. Maybe they want to text it over to them, or can give your parent the web address and that code, and that is where the parent will be able to join the FAFSA with that specific access code. All right, we're gonna hit continue, and we are almost done with the student section here. Of course, you'll have the opportunity to go through and check all these sections, make sure all of your answers are correct. You can also manage contributor information. If you need to quickly change who you invited, if you realize you invited the wrong parent, you have the opportunity to do so here. All right, but we were not done. Really common mistake is sometimes students end at that summary page, but we still need to sign the FAFSA. That's step 6 here, the signature. All right, so you're gonna take the time to read all of that information. Once you have done so, you can check that box and hit sign student section. And then the student section is done. Next is the parent section. Again, that submission is pending until the parent has officially done their section. And so now we're gonna switch over to that parent view. This is the email that the parent receives. So it will invite Alcina to join the form. Again, Raya won't be eligible without Alcina's input. So we're gonna click accept that invitation, and then it's going to ask us to provide that access code. So make sure you have that handy, parents. Alcina will need to create an account here if she has not done so already, but she's got her FSA ID and password set up and ready to go, so we will log in. Here, that code will be entered, so you'll need to type that in, and then you will be able to join the form. All right, so some FAQs if the parent wants to take a look at those before moving on here. Same set of videos if you want to take a moment to watch all of those. All right, we're gonna start the parent section. So again, verify all of this contact information is correct. And the parent is also providing that same consent and approval for their tax information to be transferred. Again, even if the parent didn't work or file a tax return in 2024. All right, so we got that success message. That information has been confirmed and or transferred from the IRS. All right, this next section is going to ask about parent demographics. So what is the parent's current marital status? Single, unmarried, and both legal parents living together, married but not separated, remarried, separated, divorced, or widowed. So for Alcina, say she is remarried. And then it's going to ask for the parent's state of residence. Say New York. And then when the parent became a legal resident of that state. All right, the next section, we will move on to parent finances. Again, many of these questions are similar, but there will be some new sections here that we will go over. So this part of the FAFSA asks if anyone in the household, so parents, parent spouse, children, or other dependents, did they receive any federal benefits from these programs during 2024 or 2025? And again, answering yes to one of these will not reduce a student's eligibility for either federal aid or these programs that are listed. So was the family able to claim the earned income tax credit? Did they receive federal housing assistance? Did any students or dependents receive free or reduced price school lunch? Keep in mind, a lot of districts provide this resource for all students, but you need to be able to meet the eligibility requirements that the federal government has set for that program. Did anyone receive Medicaid benefits, a refundable credit for coverage under a qualified health plan, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP benefits, also known as CalFresh here in the state of California, SSI, Supplemental Security Income, TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, WIC, right, Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women's, Infants, and Children, or did none of these apply? If none apply, check that box or check any of the boxes that may have applied to the family. All right, this next question is asking if the parent's family size, so all of the people that live in the household, is that number different from the individuals that may have been listed on a 2024 tax return? So this can definitely happen. Maybe there has been a birth of a new child, or perhaps another child has moved out, they're independently supporting themselves. Maybe you're now supporting an aging relative who lives with you, and they weren't on your taxes in 2024. So if you have had any changes similar to that, we're gonna wanna verify that all of the people are listed accurately. So we will say in Raya's case, she had a new sibling that was born that wasn't on the tax return. And so we can see here that family size updated from 3 to 4. We have the parent's spouse or partner, the student, and any children or other dependents. So we were able to add that additional sibling, and then we will move on from there. All right, for the 26-27 school year, how many of those people in the household, excluding the parents, will be in college? So this would be siblings or other dependents, and the student is always included. All right, we have moved on to other miscellaneous tax return information from 2024. So again, if the parent experienced an IRA rollover, a pension rollover, if the parent had their own college grant scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits that they had to claim as part of their taxes, again, not common. Or did the parent have a foreign earned income exclusion, which again is found on the federal 1040 form on Schedule 1. If none of these apply, you'd mark 0 and move on. All right, so this next question asks about annual child support received. So for the last complete calendar year, did the family collect any child support for all children in the household? If so, you'd indicate a number there. Parent assets, current total of cash, savings, and checking accounts. I want to give a little pro tip right here. The FAFSA is going to ask you for these balances as of the day you're filing the FAFSA. If you've been saving up for something big, or if you've got some bills you need to pay, some funds that are in that account, make sure we make that purchase or we go through and pay those bills before we report these numbers on this section of the form. All right, so again, you're not going to include any student aid. Do not include the value of your retirement accounts. We do not need that information here. All right, next section is going to talk about investments. So again, do not include the value of the home that you live in. That's a really common mistake we see families make. This would be any other investments that you have. So again, stocks, mutual funds, bonds, CDs, trusts, etc. If you have a college 529 savings plan, this is where you would include that. That would be considered a parent asset on the FAFSA. All right, last but not least, net worth of businesses. Again, do not include the value of a family-owned business that has less than 100 full-time employees. Or if you reside on a farm or you have a commercial fishing business, those do not need to be reported for this section. All right, so here you can see that Alcina is being prompted to invite her spouse to the FAFSA because again, she indicated that she was remarried. And so the FAFSA will let her know if she needs to invite a spouse. So in this case, we've got the assumption that they filed a separate tax return. So if that is the scenario, the spouse needs to be invited. So we will go ahead and we will invite the spouse here. We will send that invite for them to join as a contributor. Again, same thing. You can share that link with the contributor or give them that access code as well. All right, so again, parents, take the time to look at all of these sections, make sure they are accurate. You can manage your contributor information here if you need to, but again, we're not done. Do not forget to sign the FAFSA. It's a really common mistake families make. All right, please read all of that section if you do agree. Check that box and we are going to sign. And so we can see here that this parent section is done. There's still one more piece for this student. Again, the spouse of Alcina needs to complete that part of the FAFSA. But once that is done, Raya's FAFSA will be completely finalized. And all of the contributors can log in. They can view their status here. They can track the FAFSA being processed. But that is about it. The FAFSA is getting much simpler than ever before to complete. So we hope that you have a very similar experience. Thank you so much for tuning in to this demo for the 2026-27 FAFSA. We hope that this was helpful and it gives you the confidence you need to file the form yourself. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to our office. Financial aid at pacific.edu or 209-946-2421. Thanks.